The stage lights hit hard, white beams bouncing off mirrored panels and polished floors. Flashbulbs cracked like fireworks, each one freezing an instant of sweat, fabric, and grins that weren't as effortless as they seemed. The theater was packed wall to wall, thousands of people jammed into rows that hummed with expectation. They had come for celebration, for nostalgia, for the glow of legends sharing one spotlight. What they got instead was a cut that bled in real time. Jean-Claude Van Damme held the microphone the way a fighter holds a guard. Tight, sure, aggressive. His body seemed built for the stage as much as for combat, shoulders squared, stance wide. His every pause calculated to let the anticipation stretch before he struck with words. He'd just told a story about training in Europe, about real fighters who had no need for wires or choreography. The audience leaned in, savoring the rhythm of his performance. Then he let it drop. "Jackie Chan?" he said, voice amplified to a sneer. "He's a clown, not a fighter." It cut sharp, and the crowd reacted before their brains could catch up. Laughter burst out, first in pockets, then spreading, feeding on itself. Not everyone laughed, but enough did that it filled the hall like smoke. The sound wasn't warm, it was cruel. Jackie stood only a few feet away, framed by the same lights, but in a different shadow. His instinct was always to defuse, to make tension vanish with humor. He smiled, because that's what he knew how to do, but the smile was strained, tight at the corners. Cameras zoomed in and captured it, broadcasting hesitation larger than life. On the giant screen above the stage, his lips curved, but his eyes didn't. The laughter dimmed in spots. People began to notice what they were seeing. The awkward tilt of his shoulders, the fingers flexing once then curling into a fist just to keep still. His silence wasn't his usual comic timing. It was a pause heavy enough to crush the room. Van Damme sensed it and pressed harder. He paced the stage with a predator's swagger, soaking up the flashes. "In Hollywood," he went on, "he can fall down stairs 100 times. He can make you laugh while he gets hit with chairs. But in a real fight, he falls once. He falls for good." Again, laughter broke. It wasn't unanimous this time. Scattered pockets of the crowd stayed still, arms crossed, eyes fixed not on him, but on Jackie. The split grew visible, some enjoying the theater of humiliation, others shrinking from it. Jackie shifted in place. He forced a chuckle into the mic, but it was brittle. "Maybe I'm just too clumsy," he said, light as he could manage. It was meant to be a release, a way out. Instead, it fell flat. Too many people had heard the crack in his tone, the way his humor couldn't cover the heat climbing into his cheeks. The cameras caught everything. Every blink, every twitch of his jaw, every second he didn't fight back. The image fed to the screens showed a man who had built a lifetime on resilience and laughter standing exposed, unable to parry the blow. And the contrast sharpened. Van Damme stood tall, voice loud, his charisma slicing through the space. He was confident, theatrical, every gesture a command. Jackie looked small beside him, shoulders tucked, lips pressed tight in silence. Yet that very silence carried weight. Some in the audience began to feel it. The way absence could be louder than sound, how restraint could shame mockery without lifting a hand. The hall buzzed with divided energy. One side leaned forward, hungry for more jabs, eager for the gladiator to keep swinging. The other side leaned back, uneasy, sensing something out of balance. The show had slipped into something darker, a spectacle that felt less like entertainment and more like cruelty. A murmur swelled near the back rows. At first it was nothing, just whispers between 2, then 4, then 20. Heads turned, faces angled toward a shadowed section of the crowd. A man was rising slowly, almost reluctantly, but unmistakably. Recognition sparked, then spread like fire in dry grass. "Is that?" Someone hissed. "No, it can't be. Wait, is that him?" The noise rippled forward, overtaking the laughter, breaking it apart. Van Damme noticed it too. He froze mid-step, eyes flicking toward the disturbance. His grin faltered, caught between curiosity and something harder. Jackie turned, and the cameras followed his gaze. Relief washed over his face, subtle, almost hidden, but undeniable. For the first time all evening, hope flickered in his eyes. The audience's hum became a roar. Some shouted names, some cheered, others just stood, phones raised high, trying to confirm what they already believed. The figure kept moving down the aisle, calm, unhurried, not milking the moment, but owning it with the quiet of someone who didn't need to prove a thing. Jean-Claude's confidence cracked for the first time. He straightened, adjusted his stance, forced a smirk back onto his lips. But the cameras caught the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed nervously around the mic. The lights shifted, landing briefly on the man, now stepping free of the crowd. The noise surged, then collapsed all at once, as if every voice had agreed to stop mid-breath. Chuck Norris walked toward the stage. The silence that followed wasn't absence. It was pressure, thick and absolute, the kind that only comes before a storm. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The laughter from Van Damme's jab didn't echo long. It splintered into uneasy fragments. Some people leaned into it, clapping and whistling, eager to side with the strongest voice in the room. Others froze, looking at Jackie on the big screen above the stage. His lips curved into something like a smile, but his eyes refusing to follow. That image, magnified and inescapable, unsettled even those who had laughed. The hall was still roaring with light and noise, camera shutters flashing, the hum of the sound system feeding an upbeat track, but something had shifted. The audience was no longer unified. The stage had become an arena, and the crowd had split into two armies, one entertained by cruelty, the other waiting for dignity to reappear. Van Damme sensed the fracture but refused to retreat. He prowled the stage like it was a ring, microphone swinging at his side, then up to his lips. "Let's not pretend," he said, his accent sharpening the words. In Hollywood, Jackie can tumble down staircases, crash through windows, take 10 hits, and smile for the credits. It's charming, but in a real fight, he doesn't get back up. That line landed differently. Laughter came again, but thinner, punctured by pockets of silence. A whistle of approval cut through from the right wing. A chorus of boos responded from the balcony. The event was no longer a tribute. It was a duel, and everyone knew it. All cameras swiveled to Jackie. The giant screen showed his face in ruthless detail, the slight flush beneath the makeup, the fingers curling once, then flattening against his thigh. He looked like a man holding words inside, refusing to let them out, even as the crowd begged for release. "Say something," a man bellowed from the lower rows, voice cracking with adrenaline. "Stand up to him," a woman shouted from the mezzanine. The noise wasn't background anymore. It was pressure, a collective demand. Jackie lifted his microphone a fraction, considered, then lowered it again. The pause was excruciating. The hall fell into a hush, so complete the whine of the moving lights could be heard. Silence became a weapon, sharper than any comeback he might have delivered. Van Damme grinned, enjoying the tension, believing it was his to control. He stepped closer to center stage, opening his arms wide to the crowd. "We love him," he declared, mock affection dripping from every syllable. "We love the bloopers, the songs over the credits, the pratfalls. He is adorable." A hiss scattered across the hall. The word cut too deep. He pushed on, sensing some resistance but unwilling to yield. "But adorable isn't dangerous. And we are here to talk about fighters." Jackie finally forced a response, a weak attempt at humor. "Maybe I just fall better than I punch." The timing was there, but the weight was wrong. It fell flat, and the audience felt it. The joke didn't float, it sank. The crowd turned restless, no longer laughing but not entirely ready to defend him either. People looked at each other, unsure which way to swing. Phones held high caught the awkwardness from every angle. Clips were already being uploaded, the captions writing themselves. Van Damme mocks Jackie live. Jean-Claude pressed harder, raising his voice, trying to reclaim the rhythm. "Where I come from," he said, tapping his chest. "We learned to fight in places without cameras. No safety wires, no choreographed falls. You fall once, you stay down." Boos now rose with the cheers. The split was undeniable. Security along the aisles leaned forward, tense. A stagehand at the wings waved his arms, signaling to move on, but the cameras stayed fixed. The crowd wasn't going to let this die. Jackie stood there, unmoving, his silence turning into something more powerful. It wasn't weakness anymore. It was resistance, quiet but immovable. That transformation was visible, and people started to shift with it. The laughter had ended, replaced by a prickling sense that the line had been crossed. Then the atmosphere shifted again, subtly at first. Murmurs began in the back rows, spreading like sparks catching dry grass. People twisted in their seats, craning their necks. A spotlight swung slightly off its target, its beam glancing into the audience as if by instinct. On the giant screen, Jackie's face was replaced by a wider shot of the hall. The lens found movement, a figure rising slowly from the seats, not rushing, not gesturing for attention, just standing, then stepping into the aisle. At first it was disbelief. Is that? Someone whispered. No way. It can't be. But recognition spread faster than denial. Fingers pointed. Phones shifted. Gasps rolled through the room. Even Van Damme, mid-sentence, stopped. His smirk froze, his stance tightened. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Jackie turned toward the aisle, and the cameras followed. Relief broke across his face, visible to every corner of the hall. It wasn't loud, but it was real. The look of a man who suddenly knew he wasn't alone. The murmurs swelled into shouts, cheers, even screams. The crowd, moments ago divided, found a new focus. The figure stepped calmly down the aisle, steady, measured, as if the chaos didn't touch him. He didn't need fanfare. His presence rewrote the air. Jean-Claude's grip tightened on the mic. He tried to smile, but it faltered at the edges. Cameras zoomed in, catching the strain in his jaw, the twitch in his fingers. The confidence that had filled the hall only minutes earlier slipped, leaving him exposed. And then the lights found the man in the aisle. The screen above filled with his face, familiar and unmistakable. The hall erupted, but then, almost instantly, went silent again, as if every voice had been pulled from the air in one breath. Chuck Norris walked toward the stage. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the silence promised it was coming. He didn't hurry. The man in the aisle walked as though the noise weren't for him, each step steady, unbothered, cutting through the hum without needing to push it aside. The light caught the silver in his beard, the lines at his eyes. Phones rose like a forest of glowing rectangles, desperate to trap the image, but he didn't so much as glance at them. The crowd broke into fragments, cheers, gasps, even nervous laughter, but the fragments didn't merge. Security froze in place, hands to earpieces, waiting for direction that didn't come. The house music collapsed mid-chord, leaving only ventilation and heartbeat. Jackie turned, saw him, and his face changed. Relief spread across it, not like a performance, but like pressure being released from a sealed jar. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time all night, he looked less alone. Cameras caught it, magnified it onto the giant screens, and the whole hall saw hope flicker back into him. Van Damme's stance shifted. He adjusted the microphone as though it had grown slippery. He smiled again, but the smile was an echo, a second late behind the tension in his eyes. Every cut to his face revealed more. The twitch at the corner of his mouth, the forced tilt of his chin. Confidence was leaking out under the lights. The figure in the aisle reached the front. Without asking, without bowing to stage hands, he set his palms on the stage and climbed up in one clean motion. No fuss, no theatrics, just presence. The crowd roared, then cut itself off into silence, as if it remembered this wasn't applause but something heavier. Now the three men stood triangulated, Van Damme loud and restless, Jackie bruised but breathing easier, Chuck Norris planted between them like a hinge the room had been waiting for. The geometry was obvious even to those who couldn't explain why it mattered. The cameras framed it again and again, unable to resist. The event host tried to break the moment. From the wings, his voice piped through a handheld mic, too thin against the hush. "Gentlemen, let's." The audience silenced him in one collective wave of shushing. Even he seemed relieved to retreat. Chuck looked at Jackie first. No smile, no performance. Just a brief dip of his chin, a craftsman acknowledging another. Jackie met it with his eyes, shoulders loosening further, as if the gesture alone was enough to keep him standing. Then Chuck turned to Van Damme. He didn't glare, didn't posture. He simply looked, and the look lasted. Van Damme tried to fill it with words. "Chuck," he said, voice dipped in charm, "we're having a little debate. About what's real and what's just cinema." He let out a chuckle meant to feel casual. It landed like glass breaking. Chuck didn't rush. He let the pause widen until people shifted in their seats. Silence is heavier than sound, and he let the room carry the weight. Then he took a microphone from a stagehand and spoke low, every syllable deliberate. You invited them to laugh at a man who never asked to fight you. You made it about fists. He made it about work. The words didn't sting, they sank. The audience felt them settle in their ribs. Phones caught every angle, and no caption could soften what had just been said. Van Damme smiled again, but it cracked at the edge. With respect, he replied, and the phrase was armor. The world respects danger. People admire a fighter. Chuck didn't look away. They admire danger, he said, until they see courage. Then they remember the difference. It wasn't loud, but it carried. The hall drew stiller, as though everyone had inhaled and forgotten how to let go. The giant screens cut to Jackie's face again. The flush in his cheeks had faded, replaced by something calmer, steadier. A glass no longer trembling. A voice from the balcony tried to break the spell. Let him answer. Another snapped back. Let him apologize. The back and forth never spread. It dissolved into quiet, as if even argument felt disrespectful. The host crept on stage, still trying to salvage the evening. Perhaps a demonstration, he suggested, smiling like someone stepping carefully over ice. A friendly one for the fans? The crowd didn't respond. They were beyond choreography. All eyes stayed on the three men. Van Damme spread a hand toward Jackie, offering with practiced generosity. We could show them. Controlled. Respectful. His tone was smooth, but the angle of his wrist betrayed the challenge. Jackie didn't move. His eyes flicked to Chuck, not seeking permission but looking for grounding. Chuck raised his mic, almost lazily. You can, he said to Van Damme. Then to Jackie, softer, but still audible in the hush. You don't have to. The sentence hung there, thick as the heat in the air. The audience leaned forward, waiting for what would break next. The silence, the pride, or the night itself. And somewhere deep in the seats, a phone chimed with a cheerful notification tone, absurd in the quiet. People laughed nervously, grateful for the release, but the sound died quickly. The hush returned, stronger. On stage, the three men stood in their triangle, the storm pressing down, seconds away from breaking. Chuck didn't reach for the microphone right away. He simply stood there, the weight of his presence heavy enough to make words unnecessary. The lights framed him harshly, beams too bright, heat bleeding up from the footlights. But he didn't squint, didn't shift. He fixed his gaze on Van Damme, steady, calm, and the calm was sharper than any insult. The audience couldn't stand the silence. They filled it with chants, shouts, demands. Say it, Chuck, one voice bellowed, and another answered, stand up for him. Phones hovered high above heads like lanterns, their red recording dots winking across the hall. The noise built into a restless pulse. The event had begun as entertainment, but now the crowd was no longer just watching. They were pushing, urging the story forward. Third hero in a drama no one had rehearsed. Jean-Claude tried to catch that pulse and bend it back toward himself. He paced the stage, mic pressed close, selling casual even as his shoulders tightened. Well, look at this, he said, voice pitched higher than before. Now the sheriff shows up. He paused for effect, forcing a laugh into the microphone. Chuck, you're not really thinking you can teach us how to fight, are you? The line was polished, a mix of charm and ridicule. But underneath, his voice carried a tremor. Laughter sparked, but only in patches. Much of the hall stayed quiet, eyes locked on Chuck's face, waiting. On the big screens overhead, Jackie's expression filled the frame. His lips parted as though to speak, then closed again. His hands rested on his knees, but his shoulders hunched forward, caught between stepping in and stepping back. Finally, he whispered, not to the crowd, but to the men beside him, don't please. The sound was swallowed immediately by the roar of voices around him. Jean-Claude seized the noise, raising his arms as if to conduct it. We're here to give you something real, he shouted, smile stretched wide. Enough with the movie tricks. We're talking fighters, not clowns falling off ladders. A laugh scattered through the hall, but more people grimaced. The words landed like punches meant to show dominance, but missing their mark. Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't move at all. His stillness became its own kind of weather, cooling the fever in the room. Some of the chants softened, some phones lowered. Even the security men at the aisles, who had been leaning forward on the balls of their feet, eased back an inch. Silence was spreading, slow but certain, pushed outward by the sheer refusal in his body to match Jean-Claude's noise. From the wings, the host tried to cut in, his voice small and cautious. "Gentlemen, perhaps we—" But the crowd hushed him down in a single unified wave, like a door closing gently but firmly. This wasn't his scene to save. Jackie half rose from his seat again, palm open, voice trying to catch air. "It's not," he began, but the words broke apart under a chant that had no clear direction. Some demanded a fight, some pleaded for calm, all of it tangled in one chaotic roar. He sank back, eyes darting from Jean-Claude to Chuck, visibly torn between fear and relief. Jean-Claude sensed his grip slipping. He swung back toward Chuck, leaning into the microphone as if volume could restore control. "Respect," he scoffed. "Nobody's here for respect. They came to see who's real, who's dangerous." His smile cracked at the edges, but he forced it wider, daring the crowd to disagree. Chuck finally moved. A single step forward, measured, deliberate. The kind of step that says, "Enough." The room answered with sudden silence, as though the air itself braced. Jean-Claude threw one last jab, sarcasm laced with strain. "What's wrong, Sheriff? Badge not heavy enough to carry tonight." He grinned, but his eyes flicked sideways, betraying nerves the cameras couldn't ignore. Jackie whispered again, barely audible. "Please." One word, fragile but enough to widen the gap between mockery and menace. Chuck turned his head briefly toward Jackie, the smallest acknowledgement, then faced Jean-Claude again. He reached out and took the microphone from a stagehand whose arm had been extended for what felt like minutes, trembling slightly under its own tension. Chuck didn't raise it high. He held it low, close to his chest, speaking with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to compete for attention. His gaze swept once toward Jackie, once toward Jean-Claude, then into the dark where the audience sat frozen. "True strength," he said, voice even, every word cutting cleanly through the hush, "is when you respect the people you share a stage with." The crowd didn't cheer immediately. They sat with it, absorbing, realizing they had just heard the first real strike of the night, and it hadn't been a joke or a boast, but something heavier. Chuck's words, "True strength is respect," didn't fade. They lingered in the air like smoke, clinging to every corner of the hall. The audience didn't cheer right away. They sat with it, feeling the weight. Then, inevitably, Jean-Claude smiled, but it was the kind of smile that slips before it settles. He raised the microphone, forcing brightness into his voice. "Respect," he echoed, dragging the syllables into a laugh. "I came here to show the difference between fighters and comedians who happen to land on their feet." His hand gestured toward Jackie, sharp, dismissive. "Fall down a staircase, stand up for applause, that's talent. But don't confuse it with fighting." The reaction was jagged. A pocket of cheers rose, automatic, from those unwilling to let go of their champion. But the louder response was uneasy murmurs, voices low, people shifting in their seats. The crowd was no longer united in laughter. It had become a jury, split, restless, waiting for the next strike. On the giant screen, Jackie's face filled the frame. His lips parted as though to respond, but no words came. His eyes moved to Chuck, quietly asking a question. "Do I fight back, or do I let this pass?" His shoulders straightened slightly, as if the presence beside him gave him something solid to lean on. Jean-Claude pressed forward, unable to leave silence unchallenged. "You want courtesy? Fine. Teach it at a dinner table. But courage is proven with fists, not speeches." He swept his arm wide, pulling the audience into his theater. For years, this kind of bravado had worked. Tonight, it sounded thin. Chuck lowered his microphone slightly, as if choosing to hold his ground rather than chase noise. The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was resistance. And when he finally spoke, it was slow, even, like a blade drawn with care. "Courage doesn't need a victim," he said. "Pride does." The words struck deeper than any insult. The audience felt them in their bones. Some stood instinctively, clapping hard enough to sting their palms. Others whispered, shaken. Jackie's expression shifted, not saved, but steadied. A man regaining his footing. Jean-Claude laughed into the mic, the sound sharp and forced. "Philosophy lessons? That's all you've got?" He circled, restless, looking for his rhythm. "Danger is what people respect. Danger is what they came here to see." Chuck's gaze didn't move. "Danger gets loud," he answered. Character doesn't need volume. This time, the audience erupted. Applause rolled like thunder, starting in the balcony and sweeping down. Whistles pierced the air. The cranes dipped their cameras low, catching faces lit with conviction. People stood in clusters, pointing, cheering, their voices colliding into one roar. Jackie rose too, not to intervene, but to stand beside Chuck. That small act changed the geometry. Now it was two men steady, one man pacing. The cameras caught Jean-Claude's face, his smile flickering, jaw clenched. He tried for charm, but it slipped each time he opened his mouth. His movements grew quicker, restless, as though motion alone might prove control. But the crowd had already shifted. His gestures read not as strength, but as nerves. "Listen," he said, voice louder now sharper. "I respect his work. Really I do. He makes people laugh, and the world needs that." He nodded at Jackie without looking directly at him. "But don't pretend he's one of us. He's not a fighter." From the audience, a woman shouted, "Real fighters don't mock others." Her voice was joined by applause. A teenager near the stage cupped his hands and yelled, "Stand with him, Jackie." The boy's face flushed red, but the hall roared in support. Chuck lifted his mic just enough. "A real fighter," he said, steady, "never has to make another man small to feel big." The line hung in the air like a verdict. The hall froze, then exploded. People rose to their feet, clapping, chanting, some shouting Jackie's name. Jackie's chin lifted, and for the first time that night, he looked taller than the man who had mocked him. Jean-Claude laughed again, high and quick, but it died halfway. He fluttered his hand as if brushing heat from his face, then snapped his smile back in place. "Fine," he said, louder now, forcing command. "Fine. You want wisdom, Chuck? Save it for later. This isn't a sermon." He tapped the stage with his shoe. "Prove it. Here. Now." The audience reacted instantly, half cheering, half gasping. Phones tilted higher, recording every flicker. A chant surged, breaking into noise before it found words. Security in the aisles shifted closer, uncertain. Jackie stepped forward, panic flickering across his face. "No," he said, louder than before, his voice carrying through the hall. "Not like this." The sound was amplified, echoing into the rafters. His eyes darted between them, pleading for restraint. But Jean-Claude was too far in. He spread his arms, playing the showman one last time. "Right here," he insisted, grin sharp. "No cuts, no wires. A real demonstration. A fight." The audience leaned forward as one body. The energy was volcanic, unstable, about to spill over. Chuck didn't answer with words. He tilted his mic away, as though he had already spoken enough. His jaw set. His eyes locked on Van Damme. Then, slowly, he took one step forward. The hall fell silent, utterly still, the kind of silence that hums in the ears. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Jean-Claude smiled, mistaking the hush for victory. Jackie stared at both men, realizing the next choice could tip everything, into chaos or into legend. The room had turned into a living engine, thousands of hearts hammering in sync. Every camera phone was aimed at the stage, lenses glowing like an army of eyes, waiting to see history carved in real time. The chants had died. What replaced them was stranger, pure silence, stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Jean-Claude stood tall, arms spread as if he owned the night. But his smile twitched. Sweat beaded at his temple, betraying the strain. He pointed toward the floorboards. "Here," he said into the mic, accent sharp. "Not later. Now." Jackie's face betrayed panic. He had spent his life in falls, in controlled pain, but this wasn't choreography. His eyes darted between them, his chest rising fast. His voice cracked through the speakers. "Stop this. Please." The hall didn't hear him. They weren't an audience anymore. They were a mob dressed in seats, driven by hunger for spectacle. Chuck moved first. One step, then another. He didn't posture. He set the microphone on the floor, the thud small but amplified like a drumbeat. Words were finished. Gasps rippled. Cameras zoomed, catching Jean-Claude's grin falter as Chuck's eyes fixed on him. The stillness in his stance was more dangerous than threat. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was already in one. Jean-Claude tried to smirk. "So it's real? You think you can face me?" He gestured at the phones, forced a laugh. It didn't catch. Instead, Chuck turned, extended a hand, and pulled Jackie up from his chair. The hall roared, then froze, trying to absorb it. Jackie stood beside him, shoulders squared, eyes wide but steadier now. The symbolism was clear. Two men, silent, united. One man, loud, alone. The crowd exploded, applause, chants, whistles. Words collided. Together. Respect. Energy shook the rafters. Jean-Claude froze, trapped between the mob and the two figures before him. His smirk collapsed into a scowl. Chuck leaned close, voice barely above a whisper but caught by the mics. Your choice now. Fight with us, or stand against everyone. The line detonated. Jackie looked at Chuck, then at the man who had mocked him. The audience held its breath. Phones shook in hands. Jean-Claude opened his mouth, but no sound came. His body swayed, caught between defiance and hesitation. The hall leaned with him, waiting. And then, darkness. The stage lights snapped off, plunging the theater into black. Screams tore from the seats. Phones glowed, shaky beams in the sudden void. A chair clattered, a voice shouted, "What are you doing?" and was lost in the noise. The giant screens blinked white, then black. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but breath and panic. And on that knife edge, where the fight was about to start, or end, or become something else entirely, the story cut.